Imagine holding a coin in your hand and knowing, without having to trust anyone, that what you're holding is real value. Imagine letting that coin fall onto a marble table and hearing a clean, almost musical sound, a sound that said, "This is real." Now imagine that sound being silenced forever. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, with an official signature. For a long time, American money didn't need promises. It simply was. In the 19th century, every dollar carried weight, metal, and human labor. Gold and silver supported the system. Two pillars. But they were not the same. Gold lived in vaults, in eastern banks, in the hands of financiers and men who never dirtied their boots. Silver did not. Silver circulated. It sat in farmers' pockets, in miners' sacks, in the calloused hands of those who produced food, wood, and tools. Silver was the money of the people who made the country work. And perhaps that's exactly why it became a problem. Because silver did not obey. It flowed out of the mountains of Nevada, Colorado, and Montana, hundreds of tons every year. It couldn't be controlled. It couldn't be rationed. It couldn't be concentrated. And worse than that, it gave independence. A miner could extract silver, take it to the mint, and turn it directly into official money. Money created by his own labor, without asking permission from any bank. But that kind of freedom never lasts long once someone decides to control the game. The strike didn't come with tanks or fiery speeches. It came on paper, boring, technical, almost unreadable paper. On February 12, 1873, in Washington, Congress passed a monetary reform law, 67 sections of bureaucratic text, weights, measures, standards, procedures, so dull that most congressmen didn't even read it all. But in one of those sections, a word disappeared, a single word, silver dollar. No announcement. No explanation. It simply wasn't there anymore. The silver dollar ceased to exist as official money. It wasn't banned, it wasn't confiscated, it simply stopped being real money. Gold became the only pillar, and those who had gold came to control everything. At the time, no one noticed. Life went on. Old coins still circulated. Silver dollars continued to pass from hand to hand. Small purchases still worked. That was the trick. The effect wouldn't be immediate. It would be slow, invisible, deadly. Before that, the system was simple, brutal, but fair. Miners spent 12 hours a day in suffocating tunnels, 40 degrees Celsius, constant risk of collapse. They pulled silver from the earth with their bodies. Then they took the metal to the mints. The government weighed it, tested its purity, minted the coins, and kept a small fee. In return, the worker walked away with money accepted everywhere. Each dollar contained about 0.77 ounces of pure silver. That wasn't a promise. It was matter. A farmer sold his harvest for silver and knew that value wouldn't evaporate because of distant decisions. He could save, he could accumulate, he could plan. But after 1873, something strange began to happen. Miners arrived at the mints with their silver and were told it was no longer money. It was just raw metal, worth less than the face value of a silver dollar. Many couldn't read. They didn't know a law had changed everything. They had worked for months believing they were creating money. They discovered too late they were only extracting scrap. At first, it seemed like a localized problem. Then it became a wave, and then a disaster. By 1876, the impact was impossible to hide. Farmers couldn't pay their debts. Banks demanded gold. Money in circulation shrank. Agricultural prices collapsed. Families lost land, homes, everything. For those who had gold, money became more valuable. For those who needed it, it became unreachable. Eastern banks, now owners of the only accepted metal, began dictating the rules. They lent at high interest, demanded repayment in gold, and when payment didn't come, they bought bankrupt farms for pennies. That's when someone finally said out loud what many felt. A congressman took the floor and called the 1873 law by its real name: fraud. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a technical detail. It was a crime. The crime of '73. The country erupted. Farmers, workers, and miners organized. The free silver movement was born, demanding something simple: return to the people the right to turn labor into money. For 20 years, the struggle continued. Sometimes it moved forward one step. Sometimes it fell back two. The government passed half measures. It bought silver but didn't allow free coinage. It helped but didn't liberate. And when the system panicked in 1893, the same banks pointed the finger at silver. They said it was the problem. They convinced Congress. The law was repealed. Once again, the elite won. But before losing for good, silver would fight one last great battle. In 1896, a politician took the stage and said something that shook the nation. He declared that mankind should not be crucified upon a cross of gold. People wept. They applauded for 25 minutes. They believed that maybe this time it would be different. It wasn't. He lost, not because he lacked support, but because he lacked money. His opponent had Wall Street, had banks, had gold. And when the dust settled, it became clear. Americans hadn't lost just silver. They had lost equality. They had lost financial independence. And that was only the first theft. In the next part, you'll see how the government promised to protect silver while preparing the second strike. A more elegant one, more patriotic, and far more expensive for those who believed. When people realized they had lost silver, it was already too late to recover it for the first time. But the most dangerous part wasn't the theft itself. It was the lesson learned. The government learned that it didn't need to seize by force. It was enough to change rules, control prices, and call everything a temporary measure. And when the next crisis arrived, they were ready. 60 years passed. An entire generation was born without knowing exactly how it had lost the right to its own money. The country went through wars, growth, collapses. Then came the Great Depression, banks failing, factories shutting down, people sleeping in soup lines. Fear spread like smoke, and fear is always the best fuel for extreme decisions. By 1933, gold had already been torn from the hands of the population, literally. The government ordered citizens to surrender their gold to the state. Tons were stacked in vaults. Fort Knox became a symbol, but there was something that still quietly resisted in people's pockets. Something smaller, more common, more forgotten. Silver. It was the last real metal still circulating freely. Then came the right speech, at the right moment, with the right words. In June 1934, the president signed the Silver Purchase Act. The text sounded noble: stabilize the economy, help miners, protect farmers, rebalance the monetary system. Newspapers celebrated. They said selling silver was a patriotic act, that helping the government was helping the country stand back up. Banks became centers of propaganda. Posters on the walls urged people to hand over their silver to save America. The appeal worked. People believed. After all, the last time they had resisted giving up gold, they had been punished. Now they wanted to cooperate. What no one said was that the game was already rigged. Just over a month later, in August 1934, an executive order arrived. Short, direct, cold. All silver on U.S. territory had to be surrendered to the state, except coins in circulation and small industrial quantities. The price offered? 50 cents per ounce. It sounded fair, even generous. The market price was lower at that moment. The trick was timing. While forcing citizens to sell, the government itself began buying silver all over the world. It bought aggressively, artificially. It pushed the price upward. Within months, silver was worth 64 cents per ounce. Those who sold for 50 lost nearly 30% in profit, legally, with no choice. Waiting was a crime, and it wasn't the rich who lost. It was workshops, jewelers, silverware manufacturers, photographers, dentists, small family businesses that held silver not as an investment, but as working material. Many had bought silver years earlier, at the depths of the Depression, planning to produce for decades. They were given 30 days to get rid of everything. Without silver, there was no production. Without production, there was no income. Customers moved to those who still had stock. Workshops closed. Businesses collapsed. Entire families lost enterprises that had existed for generations, all within the law, all under the banner of national salvation. In 4 years, the government accumulated 40,000 tons of silver, more than the entire world produced in 2 years. Never in history had so much real metal been concentrated in the hands of a single power. People learned quickly, if the government could change the rules twice, it could change them 3 times. They began hiding coins. Silver disappeared from the streets not because of confiscation, but because of fear. No one wanted to be next. The government's response was predictable. If coins disappear, replace metal with paper. Silver certificates appeared. Beautiful, well-printed notes with a clear promise written on them. Redeemable in silver on demand. Paper circulated. Silver stayed stored. It worked for a while. Then the rules began to change again. First, redemption was allowed only in large amounts, then only for industrial use. Finally, it stopped completely. The promise was still printed, but no longer honored. Paper became just paper. Silver became state stockpiles. This was the second theft. More sophisticated than the first. Because it wasn't done by erasing words, but by exploiting trust, people voluntarily handed over their metal in exchange for a promise, and the promise was withdrawn later. The country prospered after the war. Easy credit, rising consumption. People once again began saving coins, dimes, quarters, half-dollars. They were still 90% silver. They still rang when they hit the table. It was the last remnant of honest money in everyday life. But mathematics does not forgive illusions. As the price of silver rose, something became too obvious to ignore. The metal inside the coin was becoming more valuable than the number stamped on it. A $quarter contained enough silver to almost be worth more than 25 cents. Once that point was crossed, no one would use coins. Everyone would melt them down. The government did the math itself. It knew this would happen within a few years, and it knew it couldn't control the global price of silver. So, it decided to act first. Not because it wanted to, but because it had to. In 1965, the president appeared before Congress with a grave speech. He said the country faced the risk of chaos, a shortage of coins, problems with parking meters, payphones, school lunches. He asked for permission to mint coins without silver. He guaranteed it was temporary. He guaranteed nothing would disappear. He guaranteed no one would lose. And he signed the law. At that moment, the sound of money began to die. When the president promised that silver coins would not disappear, many people wanted to believe it. After all, they had been deceived before. But this time it seemed logical. 12 billion coins in circulation, another billion being minted. How could something like that simply vanish? But the promise was dead on arrival. The last silver coins quietly rolled off the presses in early 1966. First the quarters, then the dimes, finally the half-dollars. Within a few years, even those lost their silver. The new money was copper and nickel, lighter, cheaper, soundless. When it hit the table, it didn't sing. It made a dull, hollow noise like a tin can. So what happened to the old coins? They weren't confiscated. They didn't need to be. People hid them, stored them in drawers, safes, glass jars. Grandparents set them aside for their grandchildren. Collectors bought everything they could find. Investors locked them away in safety deposit boxes. In less than 5 years, silver simply vanished from circulation. The government had promised this wouldn't happen, and it knew it was lying. From that moment on, money stopped being something you could recognize with your senses. Before, you felt the weight, you heard the sound, you saw the shine. Now, you had to believe. The coin wasn't worth what it was made of, but what the government said it was worth. And that changes everything. Because when value isn't in the object, but in the promise, whoever controls the promise controls the value. The dollar stopped being metal. It became trust. And trust is something that can be stretched, twisted, printed. A few years later, in 1971, the last anchor was cut. The link to gold was broken. American money was no longer backed by anything physical. No metal, no natural limit, only political decisions, only printing. From that point on, the system entered a different mode of existence. Inflation stopped being an exception and became routine. Prices began to rise slowly, then faster. Wages always lagged behind, never ahead. Saving became an invisible mistake. Those who held paper lost purchasing power without noticing, year after year, decade after decade. Silver, the same silver that had been removed from coins because it supposedly had no value, became an investment asset, a refuge. Something people bought precisely because paper no longer felt trustworthy. The numbers tell the story without emotion. In 1873, an ounce of silver cost just over $1. In 1934, the government forced people to sell it for 50 cents, even though it was worth more. In 1965, it cost about $1.29. Today, it's worth dozens of dollars. It wasn't silver that became more valuable. It was money that became weaker. Over 150 years, the dollar lost about 97% of its purchasing power. What once bought a house now buys an appliance. What once supported a family now barely covers a month. Imagine a farmer in 1920 who had saved $10,000 in silver coins. Today, that metal would be worth hundreds of thousands. But if he had trusted paper, he would have almost nothing. Not because of direct theft, not because of confiscation, but because of erosion. Silent, legal, constant. And today? Today, money is created out of nothing, in the trillions. In just a few years, the amount of dollars in circulation exploded. Debt became normal. The average American owes the equivalent of years of labor. The country owes more than all the gold and silver ever mined in human history. We no longer store wealth. We store future obligations. And the most curious part is that all of this has happened before. Every time ordinary people begin to accumulate real value, the system changes. The rules change. The name changes. Before, it was monetary reform, then economic stabilization. Today, stimulus. But the result is the same. Money stops singing. Once, anyone could turn labor into real value. A miner extracted silver, a farmer sold food. Money was the direct result of effort. After 3 thefts, that possibility disappeared. Not all at once, but forever. So the next time you hear that, it's just a temporary measure. That it's for your own good, that you need to trust. Remember this story. Remember the sound of silver hitting the table, and how it was silenced. Because when money stops singing, someone, somewhere, is getting much richer from your silence.